Disclosure, I was invited by the Panzermuseum Munster. In this video I talk with Tobias, a former Leopard 2 gunner. He served on the Leopard 2A6, 2A6M Plus and 2A7. Besides this practical experience, he also looks into various manuals from different forces as well. In this video we particularly cover thermal sights in tanks, their strengths and limitations. So recently I read on Twitter that the Leopard 2 thermal sight, namely the WBG-X, is a first generation thermal sight and that it's behind the RU-1PN69MT02 used by the Russian in the upgrade T-62. So I was a bit hesitant if this is correct. So what is your knowledge on this?
So first to begin with, WBG-X is made by Zeiss. It's a quite old system. It entered service in 1981, and it, like you said, it's generation 1. But as comparison, the 1PN96MT02 has roughly the same detection ranges like WBG-X. It's around 3 kilometers, it's said, for both systems. So on this point, both systems are still very similar. The point is that the new Russian system is a cheap-made mass production system for a larger number that they aim to achieve, because they still have a large number of vehicles like T-72Bs, the lack of any thermals, and also the T-62s that they plan to modernize. So I would say that even it's now new produced, it's still roughly on the same quality like WBG-X.
My understanding is that the WBG-X is not in every Leopard or Armada. It was replaced once they basically were damaged or something. Is this correct? And they were replaced with something newer, or?
Yeah, the point is the production of WBG-X ceased already several years ago in 2015. And that means also that no spare parts come in, and of course you damage the systems or they wear out, and also you have like over the years when you use the system you don't have the same quality in the picture with a new system and with a complete old system. I saw it myself back then when we switched to a new tank, for example, from your family tank you're trained on every time, and then you come to another tank and you look through the system and you see that you can see stuff that you couldn't see before, like for example tracks on the ground where a vehicle drove before. That was a point for me where you could like see the quality of the system itself. But like you said, the replacement began then in 2015. I'm not sure if even the replacement started before, to be sure. But we saw firstly in our larger scale trainings that the Marders, for example, received Attica first. And with Leopard 2A6M, when my unit received them, they also received Attica as system. And Attica is a complete new system, generation 3, with much bigger range of up to 10 kilometers of detection range and recognition range of, it's set up to 4 kilometers, if not more. And that's a complete new world compared to WBG-X. And it's a drop-in system, or not really drop-in, but it's a one-to-one replacement system. So WBG-X is set to be replaced without bigger modifications by Attica, and that's why it fits even to older Leopard 2 A4s, A5s, or even the said Marder.
What basically is the difference between detection and recognition?
Well, it's said you have identification, that's the shortest range that you have, where you can clearly say this is a T-64 of the enemy, let's say this way, or T-80. Then you have the recognition, where you can say, okay, that is a main battle tank. And then you have the detection range, that is just, there is something, like an object, or where you have to look clear into it. And that's these 3 levels of recognition that you then have between identification and the detection. So first you see normally just a thingy, a blob or something like this, and the closer it gets, the more clearer it gets to you what it is.
From what I know, Ukraine received Leopard 2A4s, 2A5s and 2A6s. And there seems to be, what you previously told me, there's a difference between the not only the models, but especially the thermal sight layout. So there's a difference. I think the Commander has an additional one or something, or what is the difference here?
Yeah, like with many things in the Leopard development, the big cut came after the Leopard 2A4. The leap from A4 to A5 was a rather bigger one, not only with the thermals but also other systems inside the tank. But the point is that the periscope of the independent periscope, the R17 it's called on the A4, it's only for day sight. It lacks the thermal, and therefore it doesn't have this hunter-killer feature that it has only in day sight, in the night. With the A5, the TIM, T-I-M came. It's a thermal imager with sadly back then digital zoom, but still a recent enough zoom on its own that allowed the commander to also see at night and even use this thermal on day side besides of the gunner, so he can split the view range and also watch over to other tanks. So the tanks are normally operating in pairs. So you have to think of that you have two tanks, and one tank engaging one target, and the commander of the other tank watches the other tank's target to switch over in case the target survives the hit or it is a miss, to do a very fast second shot on this target. And that's a thing that is also now capable at night, that wasn't capable at night with the A4, because the commander could only see what the gunner sees with his thermal and where the turret is rotated to. And that's the biggest change. And with more newer tanks, we see also, for example, Attica or Ophelios also in the periscope, in the R17A3. The one with the TIM that I just mentioned is the R17A2.
Last year I did an interview with Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Moran, aka the Chieftain, and he talked a bit about thermal sights because he mentioned he has a long time used one, and he thinks that with thermal sights, it should be easier to spot drones, because if you look up, you might see small dots in the sky, and then you basically also know better where to look at. What is your view on this? Does this work, or are there some limitations that make that not as viable?
Well, first I have to say what I thought about this question is that normally you use like a S pattern to screen the area in front of you for targets, and normally the upper end of your screening is the horizon. You rarely watch up and look into the sky if you can see something, especially with these small drones. And if you think of how far the horizon is away of you and how small a drone is compared to it on this distance, I think it still will be hard to see them on this bigger distance, let's say 3 to 5 kilometers. And if it gets closer, it also gets out of this elevation range. And if you look up into the sky all the time, you won't see what's happening in front of you. I mean, that's an interesting point. But I think the drones aren't really think the tanks should watch out for. That's, I think, a reason for more combined arms system, that you bring back systems or people designated to watch for the sky. Let's say it this way. If it's now a self-propelled anti-aircraft vehicle like Leopard or some similar systems, or either you use a jamming system like the German Hummel for this.
In terms of scanning, you mentioned an S pattern, so how does this work?
So you have to imagine that you have like the terrain in front of you, and normally terrain isn't like flat like a chessboard. You have like also elevation of your gun that you have targets that are like lower in elevation and higher in elevation, and you try to see everything in front of you from a left to right border, let's say. Like, imagine you're in a position and you have like the left border's 10 o'clock position, right border's 2 o'clock position, and you have to scout everything in between. So you start like on 10 o'clock position high, go to the right, then you go down and then go to the left again, then a bit more down, then to the right. So you're scanning these elevation angles in front of you from left to right. So you have like a pattern that you are scouting every position there after some time. So you don't go like a zigzag in the case that you could miss something that is in between. So you see everything that is in front of you.
Sometimes I get the impression that people treat a thermosight like a Wunderwaffe, a miracle weapon. What is your opinion on this? What are the major limitations of thermosights you encountered?
Well, the thing is, if you use this thermal sight, especially for longer times, you start to search only for this contrast. For example, if you are using WBG-X is the green system, then you're searching for the darker spots on it, and you're only searching for these darker spots, and you get blind for other things. You have to know that movement of vehicles and larger formations is not only visible by just seeing the physical object like a tank, but also, especially behind hills, you can sometimes see dust coming up before the vehicle actually comes up. Or also in forested lines, when the tank hits a tree, you can see like the trees moving, the treetop moving. If you see there's no really wind, but the tree is moving, you know there's, for example, a vehicle moving slowly against it. Same goes for bushes, that you see bushes moving around. And that's stuff that you can see with the day sight, but also with the binoculars of a loader quite well. Because the human eye is focused on movement. If something moves, it draws attention to you. And when you are only in this two-colored scheme, you're just searching the color differences. And that's something we train to just switch all the time. So we never used only the thermals, we switched. You have to imagine the tank has like 3 ways of using the gunner sight. You have a large field of view thermal sight, you have a small field of view thermal sight, and the day sight. And we learned roughly to spend in all 3 modes the same amount of time. So like you're moving to the right, then you switch to day sight, you're moving to the left, you switch to the big field of view, to the right, to the smaller field of view, and so on. To keep switching, and not only to stay permanently on the thermal.
Is there also some kind of fatigue setting in using the thermal sight for too long, or is this just like using a regular sight?
Well, you can use it, especially, I mean, at night you're only using it, because at night you can't use the day sight, obviously. But you can keep using it, but you get like only focused to this, and you have to live with it at night. But yeah, you get used to it. It's hard to describe in this way.
But it's not particularly straining on the eyes or something else.
It's more like the combination. We used to switch the gunner and the loader. That's why basically the training in the army is gunner and loader as the same. So you can interchange them after some time to get out of these optics. Because staying in the optics all the time is a bit tiring anyway, if you use day or night sight. Because it's a small cramped room and no real feeling for the outside, let's say it this way. Because often if you spend like 3 or 4 hours only in this optic and you get out of the tank, you are surprised sometimes where the tank is currently standing, because you have a complete different field of view inside the tank, and it's feeling like a bit different compared to the outside. That's why it's also open to drive with open hatches to get a better tactical awareness. Because from only these optics, because of this small field of view and the zoom, it's hard to get a feeling about the surroundings to you.
Recently there was mentioning that the Russians use special blankets to hide their troops from thermal sights. Do you have any experience with such blankets? Do they work? What are the limitations? And for instance, I would suspect that in a very cold climate or situation that their protection against thermals is less pronounced, but I could be terribly wrong.
Well, from one point you will never have like a perfect protection on the, or at least not in near future, a perfect protection from thermal sights. But this technique with these emergency blankets is quite old already. And I've talked to grenadiers, especially tank hunting grenadiers, Panzervernichtungstruppe in German, who are used this technique in trainings, for example, against Americans years ago, with great success.
In exercises, we should add.
Yeah, in exercise, because obviously we are not at war with each other. But this is a technique that was also described, I think, in use in the Middle East during the ISIS conflict, as far as I'm aware of. And yeah, the system works to a special degree, or a certain degree, but it won't be perfect. Same as camouflage is never 100% perfect. But it gives you like a better chance at least to not get spotted immediately by the enemy, and for example during ambushes or recognition over long distances by drones or thermal viewers from vehicles.
So it's basically good against, at a certain distance, but if one looks closely, you will still get spotted.
You always can get spotted. It's, the camouflage system in the military works on different scales down. Back then we had, for example, the problem that not all clothes or military gear that is used is protected against infrared. If you're aware of it, for example, if you have an infrared, how it's called, infrared light that is emitting infrared waves, some military gear, especially also cheaper one that soldiers tend to buy privately, reflects this and makes you like bright like a Christmas tree in optics, while other materials are made for this, not to do this. And you have like to watch many levels of camouflaging from top to bottom. And I think these blankets could work pretty well if you combine it with other systems, and you still need also camouflage against the day side, obviously. But it will make a bit different if you think of that you have a human with around 38 degrees Celsius, and the terrain of the 20 degrees Celsius. It's a way bigger contrast than when you reduce this contrast and your optics is only seeing a smaller contrast. And in a big field of view, it's much harder to spot.
This kind of leads to my next question, because Chifton mentioned that he uses the thermal eye, or used it in a way that they were scanning for basically different spots and switch the intensity, and then, there's a bright spot or a dark spot, and then he would investigate further, if I remember this correctly. Is this how you use the thermal sight as well?
Yes, and like I said before, you have this big field of view where you have like a smaller zoom, but bigger field of view, and you're scanning and you see something, there is something like a heat source, let's look at it closer, with first the smaller field of view or even the day side. But you have to know that everything that produces heat is not always an enemy, or even a target, or even military related, because you have also wildlife. It can be a deer that walks around, and you have to look for everything. So yeah, you can use this big field of view to spot something, and it's up to you if you use the day side. It's always better to get to see it clearly with your own eyes, because you can see colors with it that you can't see with the thermal itself, because it's only two-colored. But in general, it's the right way to do it, to just scout first and then investigate further there.
Was there an incident where you highly misidentified something, or thought it would be X and then it was something completely different?
Well, I often saw animals walking around. For example, I remember driving around and I thought I see during training some soldier, but in fact it was a wildcat walking around, and it was quite interesting to see it this way. And you have always to investigate further then, because it can be even a guy just going to the toilet that is not related to anything, especially on the training grounds where a public road is close to it, and you see someone walking around there, and first you think everything, it must be one of the enemies, and then you look, he's going just to his car because he stopped there and stuff like this. But also if you look into public areas that are not part of the training grounds, that often you don't see really there is a training ground ending, but you still see movement behind, and then the commander tells you, that's out of the focus, and go more left again. But that's the problem of training grounds in Europe in general, because they are more like close to urban areas, and we don't have this like wide open empty spaces like in other countries.
So one final question. You also mentioned briefly before drop-in systems. So basically, like what seems to be used by the Russians in the T-62, these are, from my understanding, where you basically they are not built in completely into the tank, but they are more or less modular.
Yes, you have like the Russians use the TKN-2 and TKN-3 systems for their T-62s, T-55s and T-72 tanks. That's the main periscope of the commander. He can use it to rotate the turret, but not to elevate the gun. So you don't have like a true hunter-killer system like it's present in Western main battle tanks like Abrams or Leopard 2A5, but rather only just moving the turret to a certain point and saying to the gunner, do you see this target? Left of this tree there is something, and so on. And for this periscope, there is a replacement now, the TKN-3TP. That's basically like this commander periscope just with thermals, but still with these limited features that it only can rotate the turret. And the Russians start to field this system, but also the Ukrainian army has, as far as I know, this system, and also even civilian arms companies from Israel developed such systems and are offering to the free market such systems that you can like drop in these systems and can give the commander of vehicles, even the BMP-1 and BMP-2, a thermal vision. But he's still limited only to be capable of rotating the turret, not to engage a target on his own. There he still needs the optics and a gunner.
But that is definitely a major upgrade for the weapon system, because you have 4 eyes instead of 2 eyes.
Yeah, at night it's incredible, but even on day that you can use the thermal can still give you more advantage in detecting targets, but still it's lacking these hunter-killer capabilities that, for example, the Leopards that are now coming to the battlefield have.
So, from my understanding, the hunter-killer capability basically reduces the amount of time that the enemy can be engaged.
Yes, it gives... I mean, you can use it in different ways. That, for example, one tank has his field of view, like I said earlier, 10 to 2 o'clock, and you say the gunner is looking at 10 to 12 o'clock, and from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock is looking the commander. So both are looking separately, and when the commander spots something, he will just use the gun on his own to engage the target without even the gunner. That's one possibility. But also another possibility of this system is if you use with multiple tanks especially, and you have targets in front of you, that you are like overwatching the targets of the other tanks. That in case of miss shots you can engage faster, or also when more enemies come up at the designated target area of a friendly vehicle. For example, you have your platoon of tanks, you split the front and the area in front of you in like amount of targets, how many tanks you have in the areas, and on one point is like multiple vehicles coming up where only one tank is matching. So it's way faster to focus or concentrate the fire there with this hunter-killer system, because your commander, for example, if you're a gunner, your commander is watching over there and he tells you, yeah, on our right side, out of our view, are multiple enemies that needs to be engaged. And then it's easy just to move over and the gun is directly pointed at the enemy. You don't have to do anything more.
Then thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye. Thank you to the Panzermuseum Munster for inviting me.